wouldn't even think about taking the shortcut home after dark, but I was exhausted. It was one of those Friday nights where I'd spent way too long hanging out at my friend Mike's place. We'd been gaming and watching movies, and before I knew it, midnight had already passed. Usually I'd walk the main streets back home, which took about 20 minutes, but tonight I just wanted to get back and collapse into bed. So, despite the little voice in my head telling me not to, I decided to take the shortcut through that small wooded area between our neighborhoods. The first few steps into the park felt okay. The main streetlight slowly faded behind me, and soon the only light came from the flashlight app on my phone. It wasn't exactly the strongest beam, but it was enough to see a few feet ahead of me. It was weirdly quiet in there. Normally you'd hear crickets or wind rustling the leaves, but tonight it was just silent. Not even the sound of cars in the distance, just my footsteps crunching along the dirt path. I started walking a little faster, wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. The further I went, the more uneasy I felt. It was hard to explain, but it felt like I wasn't alone. You know that feeling when you just know someone's watching you, even though you can't see them? That's exactly how it felt. I kept glancing behind me, shining my phone around, but I never saw anything unusual. Just trees and shadows. About halfway through, I finally heard something. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely there. A faint noise coming from somewhere deeper in the woods off to my left. I paused, shining my flashlight in that direction, holding my breath and listening carefully. It sounded almost like crying, definitely human, like someone quietly sobbing. My stomach twisted up. "Hello?" I called out quietly, trying not to sound as scared as I felt. "Is someone there?" As soon as I spoke, the sobbing stopped. Everything went back to silence. I stood there frozen for a minute, debating whether to investigate or just keep walking. Honestly, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just ignore someone in trouble, could I? I took a hesitant step off the path, pushing aside a branch. "Hey, are you okay?" I called again, louder this time. No answer. Just the sound of my heart thumping in my ears. I stood still, straining my eyes in the dark. After a moment, the silence was broken by another sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming through the leaves toward me. That wasn't someone in trouble. That was someone walking right at me. My heart started hammering. Panic surged through my chest, and I backed up quickly, stumbling over roots until I was back on the main path. I shined my flashlight wildly around but saw nothing. The footsteps had stopped as soon as I reached the trail. Now the woods were silent again, like whoever had been walking had vanished. My first instinct was just to sprint out of there as fast as possible, but something else stopped me. Up ahead, just barely visible at the edge of my phone's flashlight beam, I saw a shape standing right on the path. It wasn't moving, just standing completely still, blocking my way. The figure wasn't clear. It was just this dark shape that was unmistakably human, staring straight at me. I felt trapped. Whoever was behind me had just forced me right into someone else. My brain scrambled for what to do. Without thinking much, I jumped off the path, pushing blindly through thick bushes and branches. I didn't care how badly they scratched me or how muddy my shoes were getting. I just needed to escape. After what felt like forever, I burst out onto the sidewalk, almost falling onto my knees, breathing heavily. I turned and looked back into the park, expecting someone to be chasing me. But there was nothing there. The streetlights were comforting, the empty road quiet and peaceful. I felt relief, but it only lasted a second. As I started to turn away, something caught my eye, a small red glow. On the sidewalk, just at the edge of the park entrance, was a lit cigarette. It burned steadily, the embers glowing bright orange. My blood ran cold. That cigarette hadn't been there when I ran out. I would have noticed it. Someone had been standing right here, smoking, watching me escape. The rest of the walk home was a blur. I ran half the way, kept looking behind me, and locked every door and window once I was inside. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow, every noise outside my window kept me awake. The next morning, I told Mike about what happened. At first, he laughed it off, thinking I was just paranoid, until his mom overheard. She came into the room looking serious. She told us she'd heard from one of her neighbors that there had been some strange incidents in that park lately. People had reported seeing someone lurking around late at night, just standing still and watching them, sometimes even following them. Apparently, the police were investigating, but they hadn't caught anyone yet. That made everything way too real. I couldn't help but wonder who that figure was. Had they really been watching me, following me? And who was crying? Was that person in on it too, or were they in trouble? I tried not to think about it, but how can you not? Every time I had to walk anywhere near that park, even during the day, I felt uneasy. A few days later, I found myself reading local news reports, obsessively checking for any updates. Sure enough, an article popped up. A man had been arrested in the area near the park. The police had caught him after someone called to report suspicious behavior late at night. Apparently, he'd been hiding out in the woods for weeks, stalking and scaring people, trying to lure them off the path and into the trees. The police found him carrying knives and rope, along with a detailed notebook filled with descriptions of people he'd followed. Reading that sent chills down my spine. The article didn't have any photos, so I couldn't confirm if it was the same figure I saw, but deep down, I knew it had to be. I still walk home from Mike's every weekend, but now I always stick to the main roads, no matter how tired I am or how long it takes. And every time I pass that shortcut, I can't help but glance toward the trees, wondering if someone else is in there, watching and waiting. It was a typical Thursday evening, nothing out of the ordinary, just a quiet night. I'd spent the day buried in online classes and a part-time job that chained me to a screen for too many hours. So by midnight, I was craving fresh air to clear my head. Usually I wouldn't wander around after dark, especially alone. But Maple Street, the neighborhood road I'd lived on since childhood, had always felt safe. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other and left porch lights on overnight. Stepping outside, the cool autumn air felt refreshing, and the street was nearly empty, bathed in the soft orange glow of street lights. The leaves were falling gently, carpeting the sidewalks with yellow and brown. I walked casually, headphones in, humming along to music at a low volume, just enough to be aware of my surroundings, but still enjoy the soundtrack to my late-night stroll. I turned the corner, venturing slightly farther from home, past rows of quiet houses that stood dark and still. I felt calm, comforted by the familiar surroundings. As I approached the end of Maple Street, near the small park where I'd played as a kid, something caught my attention, a quiet rustle behind me. I glanced back over my shoulder, expecting to see a squirrel or maybe a cat darting through leaves, but the sidewalk was empty. I shrugged it off. It was probably just my imagination, stirred up by the quietness of the night. But as I kept walking, that rustling sound returned, louder this time. It was unmistakably footsteps, mimicking mine. I paused abruptly, pretending to tie my shoe, and the sound ceased almost immediately. When I stood back up and started walking again, the footsteps resumed. My heart started to beat faster, a sinking feeling setting into my stomach. To confirm my suspicion, I turned suddenly, hoping to catch someone off guard. But again, there was no one behind me. Maple Street stretched empty, still, eerily quiet. But the quiet felt oppressive now, no longer comforting. Feeling uneasy, I quickened my pace, deciding to head straight back home. My music was now off, headphones dangling loosely around my neck. I heard clearly every subtle sound around me: the faint wind, distant hums of traffic from a main road. But most concerning, I heard those footsteps again, now matching my quickened pace precisely. Whoever was behind me was close enough that I could hear their heavy breathing, ragged, quiet, purposeful. I glanced around, searching desperately for another person, a passing car, or even an open store. But Maple Street was entirely residential, quiet and sleeping. Each house I passed felt farther apart than I remembered. I considered knocking on someone's door for help, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it would slow me down and expose me further to whoever was lurking behind me. My only option was to hurry home as quickly as possible. I started to jog, trying not to look panicked, but the footsteps matched mine yet again, now jogging as well. My mind raced, searching for logical explanations. Maybe it was a prank, or perhaps some neighborhood teen messing around. But deep down, I knew this was different. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted movement. A dark figure stepping out from behind one of the parked cars lining the street just ahead. My breath caught in my throat. Instinctively, I turned onto a smaller side street I hardly ever took, hoping to evade the figure. This road was darker, narrower, with fewer streetlights. I cursed myself for not staying on the well-lit main road. The figure behind me had quickened their pace, their footsteps growing louder. My body was in fight or flight mode, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I broke into a full sprint. My house was now 3 streets away, a distance that had never felt so impossibly long. Glancing over my shoulder, I finally saw the shadowy outline of the person chasing me. Tall, hooded, their face obscured completely. They moved with determination, almost mechanically, as if nothing would deter them from catching up to me. With my heart hammering, I took an abrupt turn, zigzagging between yards and fences. Leaves and branches scraped my arms as I darted through someone's backyard, nearly stumbling as my foot caught on a garden hose. Still, the figure pursued me relentlessly, cutting through yards with terrifying efficiency. I emerged breathlessly onto my own street, recognizing the familiar outline of my home ahead. Lights were off, my parents asleep, oblivious to my panicked flight. Without hesitation, I sprinted up to the porch, fumbling desperately for my keys. They slipped from my fingers, clattering loudly to the wooden floorboards. Frantically scooping them up, I shoved the correct key into the lock, turning it just as I heard footsteps reaching the bottom of the porch steps. Slamming the door behind me, I bolted it shut, throwing my body against it, breathing heavily, expecting any second to hear pounding, to see the doorknob rattling. But nothing happened. After a few seconds, I cautiously peered through the peephole, expecting to see the hooded figure standing inches away. But the porch was empty, the street quiet and calm, as though nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night, sitting awake in my room, jumping at every sound. In the morning, I finally ventured outside, hesitantly stepping onto the porch. Everything seemed ordinary, until I noticed a piece of paper wedged underneath my doormat. Hands shaking, I unfolded it. It contained just one short message, scrawled hastily in large, uneven handwriting. "You were right to run." There was no name, no explanation, just that chilling sentence. Since that night, I've never walked alone on Maple Street again. The police found nothing, no security footage, no trace of the mysterious figure. Whoever it was vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving only a single haunting note and the lingering terror of knowing someone had been there, watching, waiting, perhaps planning to do much worse. It was late July, and I had just finished closing up at the cafe I worked at downtown. My shift usually ended around midnight, and I always walked home. It was only about a 15-minute walk, and the neighborhood was considered safe enough that I never gave it a second thought. That night was humid, the air thick and oppressive even well past midnight. The streets were mostly empty, lit by yellow-orange streetlights that cast long shadows onto the pavement. My route home passed a few storefronts, then through a quieter residential area, and finally down a narrow walkway between rows of houses before reaching my street. I plugged in my earbuds, listening to my usual podcast, the voices familiar and comforting as I began the short trek home. Nothing felt out of place at first, just a typical summer night. The rhythmic sound of my shoes hitting the pavement lulled me into a sense of security, my mind drifting between the podcast and thoughts about tomorrow's shift. As I turned onto the residential street, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. A subtle flicker of movement near one of the parked cars across the street. I glanced over but saw nothing unusual, just rows of cars, bathed in dim streetlight. I shook off the unease and kept moving. A few minutes later, I noticed it again, a brief shadow flitting quickly behind a parked SUV. My heart jumped a bit, but I rationalized it. Probably just a cat or a raccoon. Still, I pulled out one earbud, heightening my awareness. Then I heard it, a faint crunch of gravel behind me, soft but distinct. My footsteps faltered slightly. Trying not to be obvious, I slowed down, straining to hear. A moment later, I heard it again, clearly now. Someone was behind me, matching my pace. I picked up speed, fighting the growing urge to panic. I casually glanced over my shoulder, but the street behind me was empty, still bathed in that dull glow of the streetlights. Yet every few seconds, I'd hear the footsteps again, following my rhythm. My throat tightened. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. Someone was definitely there, hidden, but clearly watching me. The podcast now forgotten, I increased my pace significantly, hoping to put distance between myself and whoever was tailing me. My heart raced in my chest, my breathing quickening with every step. When I finally reached the narrow walkway leading to my street, I hesitated. It was darker here, lined closely with fences and hedges, much harder to see clearly. But I had no choice. It was either that or loop back and extend the terrifying journey home. Taking a deep breath, I hurried through the narrow passage, feeling claustrophobic in the tight, shadowy space. Then I heard it again, louder now, footsteps behind me, rapidly closing in. I turned quickly this time, catching sight of a dark figure at the walkway's entrance. My pulse spiked, fear surging through me. I broke into a sprint, racing down the walkway toward my street. Behind me, the footsteps echoed, becoming heavier and more frantic. I burst onto my street, gasping and trembling, finally beneath familiar streetlights. Looking back, the walkway appeared empty once more. No sign of the figure. Panting, I quickly crossed the street toward my house, fumbling for my keys in my pocket. Just as I was about to step onto my porch, I froze. There, standing in the shadows near a tree, about 50 feet from my doorstep, was a figure, watching me silently. My heart dropped as I stared at them. Neither of us moved. A minute passed, heavy and tense, before the figure slowly raised a hand and waved at me. A slow, deliberate, sinister gesture. I felt my stomach churn. Without thinking further, I bolted up the steps, unlocking my front door with shaking hands. Once inside, I slammed the door shut, locked it tightly, and leaned against it, breathing heavily. I carefully peeked out the window, but the street appeared empty again. The figure was gone. For days afterward, I convinced myself it was just a random, creepy encounter. Maybe some bored teenager looking to scare someone. But that changed when, A week later, I received an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy, dark snapshot clearly taken from across the street. It showed me walking home late that night, completely unaware. On the back, scribbled in messy handwriting, was a single, chilling sentence. "See you again soon." I immediately went to the police, but the lack of evidence and the vagueness of the threat gave them little to go on. No fingerprints, no clear details in the photo. They took a report, but admitted there wasn't much they could do without further information. I never saw the figure again after that night, but I stopped walking home alone after my shifts. The lingering fear has changed my sense of security completely. Every time I pass that walkway, I feel a cold, creeping dread. And I wonder if whoever left that photo is still out there, watching from the shadows.